both now and ever, and unto ages of ages. Amen.
Good morning, men.
Good morning.
Saint Ephraim the Syrian, make me whole, O God, and I will become whole. I begin every talk with this now, because it's just so good. Make me whole, O Lord, and I will become whole. O only wise and merciful physician, I beseech thee, thy benevolence, heal the wounds of my soul, and enlighten the eyes of my mind, that I may understand my place in thine eternal design. I'm going to say it again, because it's so good. I beseech thy benevolence, heal the wounds of my soul, and enlighten the eyes of my mind, that I may understand my place in thine eternal design. And inasmuch as my heart and mind have been disfigured, may thy grace repair them, for it is as true salt. Isn't that beautiful? I love that because the ontology of man, ontology, the being, the structure of man is all implied in it. Okay, heal my wounds, heal the wounds of my soul, enlighten the eyes of my mind. Okay, the soul has to be healed before we can see. So that I may what? So that I may understand my place in thy eternal design, implying that there's not only structure to the soul, but there's also structure to creation. All right, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen. The title of this whole weekend is God Created Man to Be Strong. And in order for that strength to flow, there has to become first the awareness that creation indeed has structure. And so does the soul. And there's a congruency between the structure, the ordering of the soul, and the ordering of creation. This awareness has been lost. It has been lost. And because if there's no structure, there can be no purpose. And if there's no purpose, there can be no goal. And so man ends up drifting, and he drifts on this whole sea of uncertainty. And if he doesn't find the way out of that amorphous uncertainty, he will drown. And the drowning is an existential drowning. The drowning is a darkness that fills the soul that either ends up in abject despair and despondency, actually it's despondency and then despair, or complete nihilism. That's the only two options. And my contention is that's where the culture is at. Now, how do I know this? Because I see it with the young men coming into the church. I've been a priest for almost 30 years, and 30 years ago, my catechesis, and I think it was probably true of all my peers as well, was what I now call orthodoxy in 10 easy lessons. All right, and you would find out where the person was coming from. Either was from a Protestant background or from a Catholic background. It didn't matter how nominal it was a touchstone. And you built from there. So you started the way the Protestant thought, that's where I came from, right? And you would explain orthodoxy. Or you started where the Roman Catholic was, and you would explain orthodoxy. And the person would come into a gradual understanding and a deeper awareness of the fullness of the faith. That doesn't work anymore. About 10 years ago, maybe even a little earlier, I noticed that the people I was speaking to and people coming into the church had no religious grounding whatsoever. And now, when I see the stream of young men coming to the church, which will become a flood in the next few years, it will, they're coming in for an entirely different reason. And the primary reason is this: there is such an anguish in the soul. They don't want despondency, they don't want nihilism, but they have a deep anguish and even pain in their soul, and it is so deep that they've walked around like this and they can't take it anymore, and they start lifting their eyes heavenward. They come with no Christian reference, any religious reference in their background, except something they might have heard here or something they might have heard there. There is no transcendent referent, but there is, because of the anguish in their heart, the recognition that there must be something transcendent out there that can alleviate this pain and this confusion that they feel. And that, of course, is God. That, of course, is God. And because of the internet, largely, and because of social media, that becomes their first exposure to the Orthodox faith. And I have to say, a lot of it out there is pretty good. Some really good stuff there. I think the two people at this point most responsible for introducing orthodoxy to the non-Orthodox is Jonathan Pageau and Jordan Peterson. That's the reality. There's a new podcast, some of you have heard of it, it's called Lord of the Spirits. That's rising up very fast as well, and getting a lot of non-Orthodox, I would even say non-Christian in terms of allegiance to any religious denomination. We're not a denomination, but we'll use the term loosely, right? That it's attracting listeners like that as well. And that's all something that is a larger movement of the culture, which I want to talk about today as well. Because, men, here's my thesis. I think it is time to start seeing our work as the rebuilding of culture. That's what I think. Men, it's time to realize there's a lot out there not worth saving. There's a lot out there that's going to fall. And instead of fighting against that, and I've done that for years, I think we have to recognize it is going to fall. We have to step forward. We have to prepare ourselves to receive those who are coming in. And the way we do that is we see ourselves as the rebuilders of culture. I think it's time to start the task of rebuilding culture. And what I mean by that is become the vanguard, understand what the culture is today and what's happening, but instead of reacting defensively against that, let's start planning on what the next stage is going to be. And the next stage is going to be the active rebuilding of culture, and that means the active rebuilding of men, the active re-establishment of Christianity, faith in God, as it was practiced and known in the first 3 centuries of the church, and to take a long view and to understand that we are working for the next generation and the generation after that. I think that we have to start thinking anew. I think that the Lord is leading us to establish not only ourselves, but in the establishment of ourselves, and I mean in a deeper faith, and really understanding how Christ transforms man into the Son of God, so that our work now becomes a foundation for those who follow. I think that we lay the foundation for the renewal and the regeneration of culture, taking a real hard look at how weak it is now, because the world is going to change. And we do that by establishing our churches as outposts of light. These young men coming into the church are a call to us to take our faith more seriously, meaning to become transformed into the image and likeness of God in a more thorough way, so that we can pull them out of the darkness and establish them in the light, and in so doing, lay the building blocks of Christian culture in the future. There's a reason why the other denominations are failing, and they are. And I don't say this with any glee or any sense of triumphalism or anything like that. The moral collapse of the Catholic Church in particular is a catastrophic tragedy for Western Christendom. The Catholic Church has been the moral light of Western Christendom. It has collapsed morally, which means that Western Christendom is severely, severely adrift. And part of that drifting is a captivity to ideology that fundamentally denies the godly character of the human being, and of men in particular. Meanwhile, what do we see? And Protestantism, which is really the stepchild of Catholicism, essentially has collapsed. It has collapsed. Protestantism as a cultural force no longer exists. It doesn't mean Protestantism doesn't exist, it does, but now it exists in the Catholic Church, which has become Protestant. But we know what the end will be because we're living through that end right now. Meanwhile, the Orthodox faith is growing, and the Orthodox Church is growing. And the Orthodox Church has an appeal to these young men, because these young men are the generation that has grown up in the midst of the collapse. And that's why it's no longer a question of what's your background. It's now a point of teaching them who Christ is, because they have no trouble knowing that God exists. They have no trouble. But they have no trouble knowing that God exists because they know that evil exists and the devil exists. They have direct experience with him. So we're in a situation where the spiritual world is evident to all. Anybody who doesn't want to live in a cave and who refuses to accept even a modicum of reality as it is, sees this. And a lot of people are affected by it negatively. So we're in a cultural crisis of the first order. We really are. And all this optimism notwithstanding, it's going to continue, and many people are going to be affected. When religion dies, ideology takes its place. Now, religion is the ground of culture. What's culture? Culture is collectively how you live out what you believe. The reason this church is beautiful is because the Christian faith reveals the beauty of God. And so when man puts his hands to work, what he creates is the reflection of the interior disposition and knowledge of his heart. That's what culture is. When the memory of Christ grows dim and people leave off the Christian message and all it portends for culture, beauty disappears as well, and then ugliness takes its place. Because if the heart is not oriented towards God, it has to be oriented towards something. And what happens in this age of hyper-individualism, the heart becomes oriented to itself. You are your own God. And thus the only thing you have left is sensation. And you need to be shocked. And you need to be shocked again and again and again in order to feel, because otherwise you won't know if you're alive. That explains the drift into depravity. That's how depravity happens. And that's how ugliness enters the world as well. And there's a lot of ugliness in the world today. It's in our architecture, it's in our art, it's in our culture. Now, that's why I say, I used to be a culture warrior. I kind of still am in my heart. I like to fight. I do. I like to fight it. But I realize that the restoration of culture will not happen polemically, which is to say it will not happen politically. It won't. It doesn't happen through convincing people that your arguments are better. The restoration of culture is really a matter of the heart, because if religion is the ground of culture, then what has to happen is that the heart has to open, that the heart has to see and apprehend beauty in order to make the culture strong. And that, again, means that religion has to be center, and the center of religion is Christ, and our Orthodox faith is uniquely positioned to meet that need. That's why the young men are coming. The young men are a harbinger of what is to come, but for us who are in the church, it's also both a validation and an exhortation to greater work and deeper work. Now, I said religion is the ground of culture, and I said that because religion is the ground of culture, that culture is the manifestation of man's heart collectively. So the way that we change culture begins by changing our own heart. And one of the reasons that orthodoxy is uniquely positioned in this time of chaos and confusion, because it understands what a man, a human being, really is. And I said that if religion grows weak in the culture, it will be replaced by ideology. And ideology then becomes the new religion. What does ideology mean? What is an ideology? An ideology is a closed set of ideas that is completely self-referencing, that doesn't allow for any dissent outside of it. An ideology is something that people adopt by faith, you could say, and then they live and breathe totally within that realm of ideas. Knowledge is assumed to be received here with the mind, not with the heart, so that the purpose of the heart and the function of the heart of man grows dim. And that's when you see the rise of this vulgarity and this ugliness and this deconstructive energy, you know at that point that the heart is set on the ideology, and the heart is not set on beauty, which is to say God, who also is the source of beauty. That's how you know. So in saying that we need to set our sights farther, and we need to see ourselves as the restorer of culture, and begin the work of restoring culture, particularly for the next generation, it calls on a different anthropology. It calls on a different way of seeing man that is dominant in the culture today. And that's what orthodoxy has to offer. Now, this became very clear to me. I really saw it, in 3D. Not too long ago, about 3 or 4 months ago, I went to Denmark. I was invited to speak at a men's gathering there called the European Men's Conference. There's about 100 guys there. There's a movement in Europe, a men's movement in Europe, and they're trying to recover patriarchy. They don't know this, but this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to recover patriarchy because they realize that the whole drift, the secular drift, especially of Northern Europe, Denmark, Sweden, Holland, all those places, have been detrimental to men. But they don't come to it as orthodox. They come to it as secular men who are following certain, let's call them intuitions in their soul. But it's not a turn towards Christianity. It's an attempt to escape the soul-crushing energy of secularism. Now, what is secularism? You hear this word a lot. Secularism is when the heart, and thus the mind, remember the heart is the primary organ of seeing, when the heart, and thus the mind, becomes blind to the sacred character of creation. That creation actually exists to show us meaning, what is real and what is true and what is good. Meaning, you could call it the mind of God if you want. Meaning is very important for a man to become a man. Men cannot live without meaning. A man cannot live without purpose. And in order to understand what the meaning really is, in order to understand what our purpose here really is, we need an outside resource. We need a transcendent referent. We need a touchstone. Because the answer does not lie in ourselves. The answer lies outside of us. And the answer is, of course, Jesus Christ. So to be secular means to either deny or be ignorant of the fact that a transcendent referent, a touchstone, really exists. It is to assume by faith that man himself, the individual, is the arbiter of everything that is good and real and true. The problem is, what that does, it breaks the connections between people. That's what it does. And it introduces what we call a moral relativism, where every man makes his own truth. But if every man makes his own truth, every man is his own God. And if every man is his own God, then every man creates his own universe. And we are just people bumping into each other. That's why there is so much isolation and loneliness in the culture. If there is a transcendent reference, if there is a touchstone, and we both agree that the truth does not lie within ourselves, but it lies outside of us, then we can journey together. And the bond that is natively there, because that bond is actually part of the structure of the creation, as I was talking about at the outset, that bond gets restored. That bond is actually reflective of the way reality really is, because God Himself structured it that way. And the man who seeks the truth and discovers that begins walking in that truth, and the experience of how reality is really structured and how creation really works resonates in his soul, and then his soul is vivified, and he moves into deeper self-knowledge. And that self-knowledge is tied into love, because the energy that courses through this structure, this native structure, is the love of God, is what it is. And to love is to know, and to be loved is to be known. And our soul craves that communion. No man is an island, and if we're compelled to live in that isolation, either by intention or by ignorance, the self-knowledge decreases, because there can be no love experienced, and that's what gives rise to the despair. That's what gives rise to the despair. You know what you do with the man coming into the church seeking Christ? You know what you do? And we're going to talk about this more in the second session. First thing you do is you make that man feel at home, and you offer your love. You offer your love. But be careful, because they haven't experienced it before, and they will not know what to do, and they will pull back. But at the same time, they will be drawn, because the thing that draws them is the love, understanding that the love is the energy that connects. And they're here for self-knowledge as well, because to love is to know, to be loved is to be known. It's the restoration of that connection that exists in the very structure of reality, and they're driven to search for it out of despair and deepest loneliness. And that's how the church then will become an outpost for the restoration of culture. It's going to begin here, men. It begins with us. Do you understand what I'm saying? It begins with us. Little points of light. Here, 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 and here. And it begins by the men becoming men, a man. And it begins in your fellowship with each other. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm telling you this. You, each one of you, are here because you have been called here. Each one of you are, in a sense, pioneers in that developing this brotherhood among yourselves. You enable the Lord to act and to bring other men to you who are seeking the same God, the referent, the transcendent referent, the touchstone, our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, so that they may be, like St. Ephraim said, that their souls might be healed, and our souls too, and in the healing of the soul, the enlightenment of the mind, so that we may understand our place in God's perfect design. That's what we're doing here. That's what we're doing here. So what I'm introducing to you is a calling. I'm telling you, you've all been called. You've all been called. And you've been called to do deeper work. Not only in your own hearts, although it begins there, but in the building of the church, which is the pillar and ground of the truth, which is to become a lighthouse for those seeking salvation. Without a lighthouse, the ship is going to run aground and the people are going to drown. God needs us. He needs faithful, strong men. That's where we're at. It's actually very, very, very exciting. So I'm in Denmark, and I'm seeing with utmost clarity what the end result of a secular society really is. Now, ideology, in this case, feminism, homosexualism, they're all opposite sides of the same coin. Cultural Marxism, right, promises an egalitarian utopia. An egalitarian utopia means a place where all conflict ceases. All it requires is your full compliance. I'm telling you, the full compliance is slavery. It's slavery. And how did I see this? I saw it in the men who adopted the whole secularist program and lived in it for decades. Most of them my age. When one adopts a feminist ontology, when one adopts an idea of what man is, either from a feminist, a homosexualist, a culturally Marxist point of view, what one does is deny their own character. And I saw this in the old men, in the older men. They were broken. They were broken. And it was sometimes, in some ways, kind of repulsive. Kind of repulsive is really what it was. There is no nirvana. There is no perfect society. There is no egalitarian utopia that arises out of ideology. All what ideology does is corrode the created order. And when you corrode the created order, you corrode the soul and the character of men. And you know, the ignorance was deep, and there in Northern Europe, Christianity is seen as an enemy. The propaganda has been complete. So when I spoke, I couldn't really come out with a clear defense of the Christian faith because of the presuppositions they held and the ideas they were working with. So what do? I started talking about the structure of creation and the human soul, just like I'm talking about now. And the thing about the truth is this: when the truth is spoken, when the truth is declared, it resonates in the soul. And it resonates in the soul among those who are seeking truth. Truth, in a sense, is its own verification. There's no higher authority than truth. You know, think about this. You hear sometimes, and those of us who have come from Protestant backgrounds will resonate with this, the argument, the Bible is true because it's infallible. If you say that, then what you're doing is you're making infallibility the criterion that judges truth. Truth is true because it's infallible. But that's not what truth is. Truth is truth. So why is true truth? Truth is truth because it comes from the very mouth of God. That's why. Truth is true, and the scriptures are true, because it's God speaking through the mouth of the prophet and the mouth of the apostle. Yeah, but Father, there's no proof that that's really real. Truth enters the world through a word. That's how it enters. And because it's true, and because truth is never neutral, it stirs something in the heart. And you will either be resisted or you will be accepted, depending on how the person receives your spoken word. That's why the gospel has to be preached, which is to say, spoken. Just declare it, and let the person hear it as they will. And those who seek the truth will receive your word with joy. Those who don't will resist you fiercely. And that's what happened in Denmark. So the older guys who were invested in the whole secular program and the logic of it and the moral values of it did not like what I had to say. But the younger guys who were drowning in the soul-crushing inertia of this secularism received it with joy. They were really, really interested. What is this Orthodox Christianity? I've never heard of it. And they started reading. At a guy he's 26 years old, from Germany. And I said, he really wanted to know this. And what is this Orthodox Christianity? And I did what I do all the time. I looked up on my phone, Amazon Europe. I said, buy this book. The Elder, the Guru, the Young Man, the Gurus, and Elder Paisios. Okay, it's a great introduction, especially for a young man, to the Orthodox faith. And who knows what will happen? The head of this conference was a man who came to Orthodox Christianity 5 years ago. There's only one Orthodox church in Denmark, and that's in Copenhagen, and one monastery with one nun in Denmark, and that's in mid-Denmark where he lives, a Russian Orthodox monastery. Somehow this man came to Orthodoxy, one of the few Orthodox Christians in Europe, in Denmark, let me put it that way, but it's growing, and he's the one who organized this conference. But this conference, like I said, had a lot of secular people there. And the secularism destroys the characters of men. It promises a kind of a utopian, egalitarian nirvana in Western terms, but it doesn't deliver. It doesn't deliver. In order to foster then this, and I think it's important, because we talked about the homosexualism, we talked about the feminism, we talked about the cultural Marxism. There's only one thing that really stands in way of that, and that is patriarchy. You'll notice that they're all joined in a common attack on patriarchy. What is patriarchy? Patriarchy is basically this, that hierarchy exists, and at the very top of the hierarchy is God the Father. And those who see and know and have adopted it into their hearts, right, they are the ones who have created the culture against which the cultural barbarians, the secularists now, are trying to destroy. And they understand that it's fundamentally a spiritual battle, because in attacking patriarchy, in the end, they attack the Christian religion, knowing that it stands against their utopian and egalitarian dreams. So when I was in Denmark, this is my takeaway. I gave them a lot, but they gave me a lot because I understand a lot more about these things than I did before. And this is my big takeaway. And I think it is divinely inspired. And it's this: declare patriarchy to your brethren. Just declare it. I was always holding back, and when I would talk about it, I would talk about it in ways that would placate the critics, hoping to kind of convince them. When I saw the cultural wreckage of secularism, and I saw it with my own eyes in Denmark, and what it does to the characters and ultimately the souls of men, I said, this is a pernicious enemy. This is a pernicious enemy, and it's fundamentally spiritual in its basis and character. And quit hedging and just declare. God created the world. The world has an order. The world creation has a structure, and at the head is God the Father. And God the Father, he's not male, but Father denotes relationship. And it's different than saying God the Mother. If we say God the Father and he's creator of the world, what we know is that his manner of creation is different than the way life is created within the creation. Within the creation, all life comes from the mother. Outside of the creation, the Creator is Father, so his manner of creation cannot be like a mother. If his manner of creation was like a mother, if it was God the Mother instead of God the Father, the creation would have come out of God's womb, and there would be no difference between the created and the Creator. Because just like we are the stuff and the substance of our mother, the creation, if God were mother, would be of the stuff and the substance of the Creator. But it's not that way at all. It's not that way at all. God is Father. So what is his manner of creation? His manner of creation is to speak the world into existence. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And just as the creation is spoken into existence, truth still enters the creation through a word. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And he reveals himself as male. Christ is a man. He's not a woman. Feminists hate that. But those of clear mind understand why it must be so. And so, I'm not denigrating the female, I'm not denigrating the woman, but I am attacking the ideas of an egalitarianism that would deny male and female. The male is very important because the male brings logos into the world through his work. The woman brings life into the world through her body. The manner of creation is different. The manner of creation is different. Both are necessary, both are complementary, but we men have lost the reason, the logos for our very being, and consequently, we don't know what we're supposed to do. That's what it is. And we have to be careful with these ideologies which attack patriarchy is really an attack on manhood. On a diabolical level, you know what it really is? What it really is? The devil tried to kill Christ at the crucifixion. He thought, if I could pull him into Hades, the earth is mine, and I will be the king of the creation. But what happened? St. John Chrysostom tells us what happened. It says that Hades received a body, but encountered the face of God. And at that point, at that very second, the deceiver realized he was deceived. The trickster was tricked because he knew that this Jesus would rise from the dead and destroy his dominion over the earth, which was put in place by man's fear of death. He held all of creation in terror, so to speak. But now that death had been overcome by Christ rising from the dead, his power was broken. His power was broken. You ever wonder why? You ever wonder why it was after the resurrection of Christ you have this flourishing of human creativity? It's because man began to live in God again to the best measure that we could. That's what happened. Because the Holy Spirit that Adam lost was restored to men, many men, in their baptism. And they entered this new life with full awareness of what it was, and they built a culture, and it was a beautiful culture. Go back. I go to the dentist, and she has got this great thing, this screen, right? And it's aerial videos of different countries. And I really like it. And she lets me choose which one. I said, let's do Italy today. We'll do Finland, next week when I go to the dentist. And so we've got these drones that take these beautiful aerial shots of places in these countries, all European countries. And the beauty is just incredible. I'm not talking about just the natural beauty. I'm talking about how they built the cities and the villages and the harbors and how they painted their boats. And you look at this, you go, where does this come from? Where does this come from? Where does this knowledge come from? Where does this propensity that man has to add harmony and color and beauty to the very works of his hands, where does it come from? It comes from religion. It's the building of culture. And you see the older cities, and the older cities were designed with this coherence and with this standard and understanding of beauty that has been lost. Our modern cities are just behemoths of impressive technological, I think, sophistication. You can't deny that. But a sense of coherent beauty, of the unity of this building and that building, it's not there anymore. Roger Scruton, the philosopher, does a lot on this. If you're interested in, he passed away recently, if you're interested in knowing this more. So men, what am I doing here? What I'm doing is I'm declaring that patriarchy is the order of creation. And I'm just going to declare that from now on without any reservation and live in it. Live in it. When you hear the arguments, and they always take on a moralistic temper and a moralistic tone, you're always put in the position of having defend it. Put it away. Put it away. Understand that adopting a feminist, I'm not saying feminine, there's a big world of difference between a feminist apologetic and femininity in this world, a world of difference. If you adopt that uncritically and you are cowed kind of by the moralistic tenor of the arguments, always beating you down, okay, what's going to happen is you're going to lose a grip on your own masculinity. And you're going to lose a grip on the fact that the world is ultimately patriarchal. And I'm not saying fight back politically or polemically. I'm saying, from now on, ignore it and move ahead as a man. And move ahead in the rebuilding of culture by defining for yourselves what it is that God has put you here on this world to do. The only alternative to that is to become what I saw in these men in Denmark. And it's not good, and it's not pretty. It's really kind of repulsive to see a man who has denied his own masculinity, a man who has put off developing his own character, a man who at one time understood the work he was supposed to do and refused to do it. Peter Pan's, I told them this, by the way. A lot of guys liked it, a lot of guys didn't. I said, are you familiar with the story, Peter Pan? And everybody in the world is familiar with that story. I said, do you realize that Peter Pans grow up to be Captain Hooks? They go, see, I tell people that, and they never make that connection. Peter Pan grows up to be Captain Hook. Captain Hook was a Peter Pan at the end of his life. That's what happens. And you become withered and bittered. There's nothing you can look back on your life that gives you any satisfaction, because you never, ever rose to the challenge of your own manhood and what you were supposed to do. And that's what the ideologues would have you be. They would have you be that, and we have to say no. This is not going to happen, because it's only the men who bring the work, the life into the world through their own hands. It's man who is creator. Now, we hear this in a polemical framework, oppositional framework of the ideologue. Step out of that framework. Step out of that framework. Because I contend that as the men recover their manhood, culture will be rebuilt. That's how we're going to rebuild culture. We got to recover our manhood. But I contend also women, clear-headed women, clear-thinking women, and there's a lot of them, are waiting for us to do that. They're waiting. Because if the world is hierarchical, and indeed it is, there is an order by which real progress occurs. And you know what? The roles, male and female, they're not interchangeable. They're not. They're trying to tell us that it is, but they're trying to do it by obliterating the distinction between male and female. It can't be obliterated. It can't. It's within the very order of creation. We hear this again because of cultural programming, propaganda really, in oppositional terms. Male against female. And if I say that these roles are not interchangeable, they reach deep into human ontology, okay, those ideologues, whoever they are, will start pounding on me because I'm asserting something that is really true in the nature of creation. And it has to be pounded, right? It has to be pounded because it can't be logically refuted. Because the notion that male and female don't ultimately matter is a lie. It's a lie. Even to say that male and female are not interchangeable roles, that all that matters is gender and not sex, in an age of such moral confusion, that truth rings even louder than it would in a culture where it was generally accepted and the confusion does not exist. All the more reason for saying it. Usually the things that needs to be said in any situation of conflict like that is the one thing that is the hardest to say. that you're going to get pounded for the most. That's why, men, we have to say it. But again, our point is not to battle the ideologues, because that's going to collapse. It's not sustainable. Remember that. It's going to collapse. It's not sustainable. All right? And it's starting to collapse now. The point is to live as free men, clear-minded, of pure hearts, and start rebuilding what was lost. That's our assignment. That's where we got to go. So that was my takeaway from Denmark. And it was a takeaway, as I said, when I looked into the belly of the beast, when I really saw what secularism did to the characters of men, and I saw the face of the devil. I saw the face of the great destroyer, the father of lies, the one who would destroy what Christ has created, because it was Christ who did the speaking. All revelations of the Father work through him. We just didn't know he was Christ until the incarnation. But he did the speaking. He did the speaking. All would destroy everything that Christ has created in order to destroy the memory of God from the culture. So I said he tried to kill Christ. He tried to kill Christ at the crucifixion, but he failed. So all he has left is to remove the memory of God from the larger culture. And the way that you can remove the memory of God as Father from the largest culture is to destroy fatherhood, the notion of fatherhood. And in order to destroy the notion of fatherhood, you have to destroy our understanding of manhood. That's what it is on a fundamental spiritual level. It all gets worked out in the culture. I think that feminism, I know I say these things and some people are going to pound on me when they watch the video, but I don't really care. I think that feminism arose as a way to attack men. Because feminism arose, and its primary objective is the aborting of children. I mean, feminism exists for two reasons. It's kind of the mouthpiece for the abortion industry, makes a lot of money, okay? But it also exists on a spiritual level to deny the central, most beautiful, most prescient point about the female is that she can bear children. It separates the child from the mother. And it reduces motherhood to a utilitarian function, thereby denigrating what woman really is, her value, and even her beauty. Because that a woman can create a child is a marvel of creation. That a new child, a new being comes out of the body of a woman is glorious. And it is a primary constituent and definition of what woman is. But feminism, denying motherhood, the value of motherhood, actually demeans the woman and devalues her and defaces her. Why? Because in the end, the woman has to be destroyed. Womanhood has to be distorted and even destroyed in order to reach the man, and destroy man in order to eliminate the memory of God as Father from the culture. That's what's going on. That's what's going on. Okay, and again, how do we combat that? Our purpose is not really to combat the ideologues, it's to understand them, but not really to combat them. The purpose is to recover our own manhood, and in doing so, recover culture because they're going to work hand in hand. Don't forget that. Don't forget that. But we have to understand what this is over here. I'm talking about the ideology, so we can understand what we're up against. All right. So let's go a little bit deeper into restoring manhood and the recovery of culture. I said earlier that the energy that flows through these connections that are built into the very structure of the creation and the very structure of the soul is love. But what is love? Well, love, I said, is to know and to be known. But man has to work with God. The Apostle Paul said that we are co-creators with Christ in order to develop and grow into the being, the man that He created us to be. Part of being created in the image and likeness of God is that we are given what I would say is a terrifying freedom. It really is. Our freedom is greater than we realize, because we do have the freedom either to embrace our Creator or to reject Him. But that ability, we call it free will, but I call it radical freedom. We do have a free will, but we have a radical freedom. That is part of the characteristic of being created in the image and likeness of God. It is. Part of the fall is separation from God. That's what makes that freedom evident. Remember that the fathers say that Adam was not fully grown yet when the temptation happened. And the temptation was this: the devil, the serpent, said, "You shall know good and evil." The fathers say that knowledge would have been given to Adam in due course and due time. But Adam desired that knowledge earlier, so instead of waiting on God, he looked to the creation to give him that knowledge. That's how the devil tempted him. So eating the fruit of the tree represents that he looked to the creation rather than the Creator for only the knowledge that the Creator could and should give. Consequently, he did see now the difference between good and evil, but he became captive to the evil. And we inherit from Adam a propensity towards death, because the separation is a kind of death, but it's a death that is illustrated in many ways. Its ramifications, in other words, are Adam's separation from God, a separation between Adam and nature, a separation between Adam and Eve, and ultimately a separation of the physical death, the separation of the body from the soul. So when we hear death, we think of physical death at the end of life, but actually if you look closely at Genesis, all these separations are implied. And we call that in Orthodoxy we are captive to the death that Adam brought into the world. We differ from the West in that the West teaches we are all guilty of Adam's sin. Orthodoxy does not teach that. Only Adam is guilty of his own sin, just like I'm guilty of my sin and you're guilty of yours. And so that's where repentance comes into play. But what we inherit from Adam then is not guilt over the original sin. What we inherit from the original sin is this propensity towards death, a captivity towards death. Death is in the world. We are born into a world where the separation exists. And so the restoration of culture then works hand to hand with the restoration of our own soul. Because what redemption is, Redemption is God working in us to restore our human nature that is subject to corruption. God working in us to bring us to the place where Adam was before he sinned, which will be realized on the final day in the kingdom of God. So redemption is really a restoration of the human soul, the restoration of human nature. The salvation and redemption is the fullness and the completion of each one of us as sons of Adam into the image and likeness of the second Adam, Jesus Christ. So it is full and concrete, and it comes to us as God's love, but God's love itself has character. It does. The energies of God, which flow to us in His love, have a purpose, have a telos, have an end. And that is to restore you as man. And this is done through what we call the cultivation of the virtues. Hang in there, guys. I know you're getting tired. I can see it, but we only have 15 minutes. But this is really important. It's really important. Yes, 15 minutes. It's through the cultivation of the virtues. Strength, courage, wisdom, patience. We want to become stronger men. What we have to do is cultivate the virtues within us. And we cultivate the virtues through the power and the energy of the Holy Spirit. So to be redeemed, then, is very concrete. It's a very concrete process. Redemption doesn't float out there. Redemption is something that we experience in our communication, in communion with our neighbor. This is why brotherhood is so important. We have to cultivate courage. We have to cultivate strength. We have to become self-disciplined. We have to become men of greater discipline. We have to do our prayers. We have to, I talk about this a lot, I'm not going to talk about it here, but we got to put away the descent into sensuality whenever we are faced with difficult situations. That's an affliction of our age. It's an affliction of our age. When things get tough, we want to comfort ourselves by a descent into sensuality is what we do. It's characteristic of our age. We've got to stop that. We have just got to stop that. We've got to become more manly. But this becoming more manly is the acquisition and cultivations of the virtues in us. And what we will discover is that if we really seek to deepen these virtues and put away the sin, sin is looking for God in places where He is not. We will find God at the end, within and at the end of that struggle. And the struggle itself is what makes us more manly, which is to say, makes us more of who God created us to be, because God, as I said at the outside, created us to be strong. That's why. The beauty of our Orthodox faith is this: it understands it and it can teach us how to do it. The cultivation of the virtue, in the Greek it's arete, is what makes man the warrior that he is created to be in the arena in which God chooses him to fight. The cultivation of the virtues is a way that the man becomes the warrior to fight in the arena in which God chooses him to fight. So the virtues is really the strengthening of our character, of what the Apostle Paul calls the inner man. And the inner man has to be strengthened in order for the outer man to prevail. So the only way that we're going to bring restoration to culture, the only way that we're going to vivify, make our churches alive and beacons of light, is if we take on this project of developing virtue, because that's the place in which God works. When I take on a guy just coming out of the matrix, that's what I call the world they're in, because they're coming out of the matrix, okay? I mean, guys approach me and I say, are you ready to come out of the matrix? They say, Father, I got to get out of the matrix. Okay, it's a great metaphor, it really works. Okay, the first thing we do is start working on what needs to be worked on. And what happens is, it's really beautiful, man, it's just so beautiful. What happens is the guy starts struggling against the sin which used to compensate for that hole in his soul. That hole in his soul is really, it's not in touch with his own manhood, all right? And so the descent into sensuality was usually quite pronounced and habituated. I deal a lot with that. But as that struggle starts and that fight starts, what happens is the guy experiences the real fulfillment he's looking for, and that fulfillment comes when he starts applying his hands to creative work. And the soul, and God is so good, and God is so merciful, I love seeing this, that they get that flush of real soul gratification, and it's their first touch with real manhood, because a lot of these guys didn't have any fathers to teach them this, all right? Either no father was there or the father was absent. And they experience this, and you see them come into connection with who God really created them to be. First of all, a man. And they get filled with this power and light. And many of them, over the years, it doesn't take that long, you just see them grow and become strong and find their work, find their careers. It's just absolutely beautiful. I contend it can't happen anywhere anymore except in Orthodoxy. I suppose it can because God's very merciful and God's very good. But we've got the formula, guys. We've got the formula. And all of you can be mentors in some way or another to them when they come in. They need brothers. They need fathers. And that's how the church becomes a lighthouse. That's how the church becomes vivified. That's how the church partakes in rebuilding the culture, and it's all tied up with your salvation in a very concrete and specific way as well. So I'm going to conclude now. I can see you're getting tired. It's been a long time. The ideologies, refute them by living truthfully. They're going to collapse. But be aware of how influenced you are by that, because it's a constant propaganda barrage. Become aware of how you've been propagandized and put it out. Live authentically, live truthfully, okay? The moral power that those arguments seem to hold is a lie. They don't. Secularism, the rejection of the transcendent and of God, in the end, is a corrosive rot, is what it is. And it will not bring forward the egalitarian utopia that they promise. I've seen that with my own eyes. Okay, so put that aside. The world indeed has structure. God the Father is at the apex of it. It's the way that creation is created, its deep reality. and it bears a congruency with the structure in your own soul. This is vivified by the very Spirit of God as we step forward to cultivate virtue in our own lives. And that very process is what gives us strength, makes us men, establishes the bond of communion with us that is necessary to become strong men, and through that, the church becomes the city set on the hill. And I contend it's the men are the only ones who can do that. That's how the church becomes a city set on a hill, and we save others as we are saved, and in all things, God is glorified. All right. You can all take a breath now. All right? And soak this in. A couple of questions before we break. We have a microphone up here.
Bob, you've had a lot of debates and discussions. What is the line or the introduction that you use in order to open up the discussion about this to make people receptive? Eric made an announcement at our church on a Sunday morning, and it was a strong, bold announcement, and it was, part of it was being aware and dealing with masculine toxicity, and I could almost hear a communal.
Yeah.
So what kind of language have you seen as successful, or is it not a global successful comment? Is it just a trenches and just working hard?
I'll tell you that the most successful thing I've seen, and we're going to talk about this in the next section, is a grow the affection between men in the brotherhood. All right? I don't really take on this stuff polemically anymore. I used to. I don't, because you're not going to get anywhere, right? So lots of times I let things slide because I'm just not going to get into an argument with people and just, go down that circular rabbit trail that never ever ends. I'm only explaining it here for you guys and knowing that this recording will get out. We have to understand what it is. I'm not going to persuade the critics. I know that. So that we understand what it is, so we can kind of purify our own minds from the propaganda. But your question, how does it become evident to other people? It's when the brothers love one another. That's really what it is. This connection between men is so real and it's so important that it becomes amplified, that people really feel the love of another brother. When that happens, that's how this is going to grow, because it's in accord with creation. My goal is to establish brotherhoods all over the country, because I'm convinced that the establishment of brotherhoods will vivify the hearts of men, will release the power of Christ in our own lives, first of all, right? And then also vivify our churches, and also has the possibility of transforming culture. I really believe this. I'm committed to this. So, men, learn how to love one another. Be a brother to one another. We're going to talk about this, I said, in the next section. I'm just going to read from what St. John Chrysostom says. I've got a handout all ready to go. And we're just going to go over it line by line. And it's St. John Chrysostom. Who can argue, right? Who can argue? But that, I think, is the answer to your question. You're not going to convince. You're going to reveal. You're going to reveal, like Christ reveals himself to us. By your love shall all men know that you are my disciples, it says in Holy Scripture. Okay, anybody else? Eric, I think we're ready to go.
I did have a question.
Well, you got to go to the microphone so they hear you.
I guess my question is kind of feeds off of what Peter asked, because I think about this a lot and I pray about this a lot. But what I'm hearing you say when you talk about, changing the culture, rebuilding the culture, and then by way of cultivating our virtue, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then it almost sounds like you're saying, that we need to do that through, our brotherly love in this community.
Mm-hmm.
So it seemed like more of a focus inward. When I say inward, I mean within the church, as opposed to a focus of outreach or outward.
Mm-hmm.
Or is there a balance? Or, because I struggle with the same issue I think that Peter was talking about, is not having the right words to defend and be that culture warrior, as you use that language.
Yeah.
When we are faced with some of this ridiculousness in our society, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not being able to, and I actually pray that I will be able to bear witness to Christ's peace and love, and to be that shining light of His holy gospel. More so through my word. More so through my actions and my deeds, my disposition, as opposed to my words. But sometimes it's impossible when you're faced with some of this, right? And you're going to face it, and you need to stand up for our beliefs, right? And I can, I guess, find myself struggling with that. But then also, how do you rationalize that? When by following Christ's command to turn the other cheek, and it's like, how does all of this play in? I know that's kind of a wide meaning. But,
Well, yeah. We're always looking for kind of like the whole program, right? That answers every question. But we can't have that because life is just too complex. I really understand your question. All right, so a lot of times you make calls in different situations, and if you're cultivating this interior life like I'm describing, you're actually going to have discernment, and you're going to know what to do. All right, because some situations call for different responses than others, even though both situations seem that they're alike. That's where discernment comes in. But it's not so much here about having the right answers. It's about becoming fundamentally a whole person. That's what it is. Because when you encounter a man like that, it's very attractive. We're all drawn to men who have a deeper sense of self than we do. We're all drawn to that. And that's because it's our natural propensity, given the structure of our own soul, is to arrive at that depth for ourselves. And so it's not so much having the right answers in a give and take. It's good to have the right answers, but it's not really the give and take that transforms hearts. It might win an argument. And this is what I learned about being a culture warrior, right? That nothing was really changing. I gave people who were on my side better arguments, but it didn't change the culture. And that's why I quit being a culture warrior. And so it's about the transformation of the inner man. It's about deepening self-knowledge. It's about greater maturity. It's about more self-control. Because the cultivation of all those virtues also sharpens the work that God has called us to do, because there's more of us that we can put into it. I think that's how the culture is going to change. I don't think it's going to change by op-eds in the Washington Post or whatever. I don't. I think it's going to be face-to-face from the inside out. So there is such a thing as top-down influence. There is such a thing as bottom-up influence. Those exist. But the world fundamentally changes from the inside out. because it's heart touching heart. That's what transforms a man. It's when the bonds that are there within the creation are vivified, when God breathes his life into it, like he breathed life into man and man became a living soul. Those bonds are there. I mean, they're in ontological, in the structure of creation. Sometimes they're all shriveled up and they're dry. Sometimes they're broken and need to be healed. But that's what's going to restore the culture. I think culture is restored ultimately when the communion between men is restored. That's how it's going to happen. Men helping men. Men loving men. And how that's done outside the church and inside the church, that's what we're going to discuss in the next session. Does that help at all, Eric?
Thank you.
Yeah. You have to defend when you need to defend. You have to. And I will. I mean, when I was in Denmark, I was approached by some of the older guys, and they said, you have to begin, I talked like 3 times to the whole group. You have to begin your talks with the way that I see it. And I said, well, that's presumed. I said, if I didn't see it this way, I wouldn't be up there talking. And they said, no, you have to start with the way that I see it. I say, but everybody knows I see it that way. I wore my rasa, everything. Everybody knows this. I mean, I'm not hiding anything here. And then he said it again, and then I got it. He said, no, everyone must start their talks with the way that I see it. And I thought, oh, he wants me to give a pinch of incense to Caesar. That's what he wants. That's what he wants. Because if you preface your talk with that, and everybody's supposed to, it's social convention, then what you're really saying is that this is the way that I see it, but you can believe whatever you want. In other words, I'm confirming that I believe that moral relativism is the absolute law, okay? That's what he was asking me to say. And I refused to say it. I said, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I said, I'm just going to go up there, I'm going to say, I'll take my hits. If you don't like it, you can hit me. I get that. I'm stepping into the arena. And that's what they did not like, was the fact that I did not give my pinch of incense to Caesar. I do not agree that all things are morally relative, that truth is relative, that truth is whatever we see it to be. See, that's the pinch of incense to Caesar in our day, really saying truth doesn't really exist. But we'll have a lot of fun talking about these ideas. That I wouldn't do. And that's what we're not going to do. So we're going to be ready to answer any man who challenges us. All right. But we're going to do it on our own terms from now on. That's what we're going to do. All right, any other questions or... Oh, one more question. You got to go to the microphone. And I think that's probably it because it's lunchtime.
Workshop.
It's what?
We got a workshop.
Oh, workshop. We got a workshop. Okay.
Kind of piggybacking on what was said earlier, just now, I was thinking, what if another way to see, beginning, like the guy saying, begin the talk with the way that I see it. I was thinking like, oh, like maybe like start in their lens, and from their lens rebuild, restore with the truth, like perhaps, and that helps signal to them that we understand how they're seeing things and how things can move to a higher direction. Mm-hmm.
You have to be respectful, and I was respectful. It's really true, but you have to also understand that this is not a refutation to you, what I'm saying, just generally, that when the presuppositions are such that they challenge the person's foundational assumptions, at that point, what you say might get you into trouble. There will be pushback. And that happens. But at the same time, because it's true, right? At the same time, you have people who really respond to it. It was interesting to me that the older guys were really resistant. The younger guys were waiting to hear this because they're never told this.
I tremble for the fearful day of judgment, but trusting the compassion of thy mercy, I shout to thee like David, have mercy upon me, O God, according to